gray Atlantic, laden with tools for all-out offensive warfare, sail the convoys. Week in, week out, squat freighters and tankers head into the winter sea with cargoes of food and munitions for the expanding front lines of the United Nations. Shepherded by fast destroyers and corvettes, these ships of freedom sail on over the dark horizon into the dangers of tempest and attack.
could see just a bit of flaming wreckage that sank very quickly, and a handful of men, their faces black with oil, shivering on a raft. And away off in the distance was a lifeboat looking for others, and bouncing about like a walnut shell. They're doing real things out there.
You're doing real things too, Dick.
Yeah? How?
You're helping to build the ships, aren't you?
Ships? It might as well be frying pans as ship plates.
But, Dick, the steel plates you make, they're just as important as the guns. Why, if it weren't for you...
Yes, I know. But when you do the same job every day, you sort of lose sight of what it means.
You mustn't feel that way, Dick.
I know, dear, but if you could only see what they did with our stuff. Bye, honey. That's the trouble with the whole thing. Our plates go into ships, but we're so far away from ships we lose sight of them. Seems funny, though. You'd think doing the same thing all the time would bring you closer to it. But I guess it just becomes a habit. like biting your nails. That's the way it is now. If we could only find out just how they use the plates we make.
Hi, Dick. What's eating you anyway?
Huh? Oh, nothing. Just thinking.
These are the side shears where the plates get their final trimming. Lieutenant Watson, to Bingham.
How are you? Fine.
What's this plate for?
It's just an order number to us.
Just a number, eh?
Yes. You can't get very close to a number.
How do you mean?
You take in the paper this morning that story about the convoy? We feel out of it here.
Out of it?
Sure. If we only knew what ship this was for or where it goes on the ship, we'd feel a lot better.
Well, it'd be a bit tough to tell you that.
Yes, I guess so.
But I think we could arrange. Yes, we might at that. How would you like to see a ship launched? A ship that's got some of your plates in her.
Would I? Sure I would. There's a fat chance of that.
Well, we'll see. There she is. Better take a good look.
So that's the baby. Well, when do I start?
Hold on now. You see those triggers there? When the time comes, there'll be men standing by to cut the ropes.
Isn't she ready yet?
Don't sound so glum. There's quite a bit still to do, but you'll be in at the finals. Come on, there's other things to say. Other things? Sure, ships have to be built before you launch them.
You think I don't know that?
That one weighs about 1.5 tons. But they come as high as 13 tons. They cast them all in one piece.
They pour it, huh? Just like we do at the mill.
Not exactly. You see, you make ingots, but they have to cast a whole propeller with delicate curves, sharp edges, and so forth. So they pour it from the bottom up, as it were.
That cuts out splash and helps the mold keep its shape.
That's it. Then they break the mold, chip the rough casting with a cold chisel, and it's ready for machining. First, they lop off the top of the screw with a precision cutter. Then they take it to the pitch planer. The pitch planer is very ingenious. It's a machine that planes the surface of the propeller along the exact pitch or angle of the blade. This particular one was designed and built in just 3 months right here in Canada. After all the other machining is finished, they sand it. This gives the propeller a very high polish and a better bite. The engines, of course, have to be big stuff too, even for a 300-ton minesweeper. A big marine engine weighs nearly 150 tons.
Why, that's tremendous.
Yes, but it has to do a great deal of work. Drive the ship, turn it, and reverse it. The auxiliary motors have to be firmly attached to the main engine with eccentrics and connecting rods.
How long does it take to build one?
Oh, it varies. About 3 months is good. They have to machine the base and level it. Then they have to get the main bearings bedded. Then the crankshaft goes in. And believe me, that's some crankshaft. It weighs over 18 tons. Then the business of dropping the cylinders into the combs is pretty tricky. That single operation may take a crew of men several hours.
Bit different from a land engine.
Well, it has to turn a shaft maybe 90 feet long and 18 inches wide, and don't forget it's got a propeller on the end of it.
Then it's got to drive a 1,000-ton vessel through the sea at better than 20 miles per hour. But what gets me about these engines is the delicate work that goes into the pressure gauges and valves. They pour these gauges from small carbon arc furnaces. The temperature in there is around 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit.
A bit of the steel mill in that.
Maybe, but the tooling is a lot more precise, if you'll pardon me. And drilling the correct movement for the gauge is work that can be done only by people with a watchmaker's skill on the lathe and the boring mill. The same applies to the assembly. Each gauge is calibrated separately and tested under steam against a master gauge. You see, they have to be absolutely accurate.
You mean men's lives might depend on the right head of steam at the right time?
Most certainly. The same as they might depend on that pump there.
Pumps? I thought they only used them when the ship was full of water.
Not at all. They use them for pumping out the bilges, for maintaining ballast, and of course for making fresh water out of seawater.
Say, that's quite an idea.
Yes, it comes in very useful. They make a condenser out of copper tubing, pump in the seawater, and vaporize it with live steam. Then they cool it off and distill drinking water from the mixture. Then they pump what's left overboard.
Sure, but what works the pump?
Usually it works off the steam pressure of the ship, but sometimes off the generator.
Of course, the lights.
Not only that, the cooking, the winches, the ammunition hoist, and the degaussing girdle, don't forget that. Why, a large battleship has enough power to light the whole city of Hamilton, and these generators do the job. They're run off the steam by a prime mover.
No wonder there's so much wiring in warships.
About 37 miles of it in a small trawler alone. Every wire has to be insulated with rubber. They mix raw and reclaimed rubber, and then cut it up in chunks for the sausage machine.
The sausage machine?
Well, it looks like one. They feed the wire and the rubber through a sort of mincer. It comes out all covered and ready to be baked in the furnace. Then it can stand up to salt air and water. They have neat ways of braiding it all together, too. Automatic machines that find any number of strands and cover them with cotton. If you can imagine a sort of mechanical knitting bee, well, anyway, that's how they do it. One of the things we seem to think of more in connection with sailing ships than with modern ones is rope splicing, but it's still a very necessary part of the game. There are lots of ropes still needed on board ship, and they all have to be spliced. End splices, aisle splices, long splices, and they're all done by hand. Sometimes, rope is used as a buffer to prevent wood from wearing away by rubbing. But nowadays, there's another problem to tackle, splicing wire cable. The principle is just the same, but it's a lot tougher to do. In the storeroom, that's what they used to call the ship chandlery, you'll find a spare part for pretty nearly half the insides of the ship. Pumps, buckets, brass fittings, wheelbarrows, coils of rope. And life belts, lamps, fire extinguishers, Turk's heads to keep the ship from rubbing too hard against the jetty, flags, hatchets, even a complete set of bells, engine telegraphs, wheels, and binnacles. The binnacle is the compass housing.
It's like a floating city.
You mean it will be a floating city?
hereby name thee His Majesty's Canadian ship, Cobalt.
So you thought she just headed out to sea, like she was, eh?
Oh, just a minute, fellas. I didn't say that.
Give him a break, fellows. After all, this guy makes steel.
Yeah, you'd look pretty silly in a steel mill, Charlie.
Suppose you tell us what happens after launching. Then we'll all know.
Well, it's pretty straightforward. There's always the odd bit of welding and riveting to be done. A certain amount of paint work before she's ready for their test run. That's when she really gets put through the hoops. They may give her 4 hours full power, and they'll take her out of port no matter how dirty the weather is. Many's the time I've seen waves break clear over her bows. I've seen her bucking headwinds like a regular bronco, and up on deck you'd think maybe it was a storm in mid-Atlantic. But on the bridge, everything's as calm as if we were in port. Captain giving orders, engine room taking 'em, and the whole thing going like clockwork. It may be a corvette, or a trawler, or a minesweeper. It's all the same. They plow through the water like sharks, and when they hit port again, it's 10 chances to 1 that trial run turns out to be an acceptance run.
That certainly says a lot for your shipbuilding.
For our shipbuilding, you mean? We've all done something for those ships. The boys that make the propellers, or the engines, or the pumps. You with your steel.
Yeah, don't hold out on us. What about that steel you make?
Well, it's not very much to talk about after seeing 150-ton engines, but, well, it goes something like this. We put the iron ore into a blast furnace with coke and limestone and heat for about 9 hours. Then it's drawn off. First the slag. That's the part of the ore that's no good. It's like lava from a volcano. Then the iron. Then it goes from the blast furnace to the open hearth, where we make it into steel. In the open hearth, we keep the hot metal at nearly 3,000 degrees for about 10 hours, and then it's poured off into big ladles. That's called tapping a heat. The big ladle takes the hot metal and pours it into big molds which form ingots. Take the ingots to what we call the blooming mill, and there they roll them into slabs for us at the plate mill. We get them and heat them up again to about 2,300 degrees. Then we roll them into plates to the size specified on the order, anywhere from about 3/8 of an inch thick to 1.5 inches.
That must be pretty tricky, getting it down fine when you've got a chunk of hot steel that size.
No, there's a dial on the roller that tells us how thick we got it. And a couple of fellows sitting up in sort of a signal cabin. They control the rollers. It takes 17,000 amps to turn those rollers, enough to light your home for nearly 5 years. And the pressure is 75,000 pounds to the square inch. Flush a man of jello if you ever got under it. After the boys at the roller have got through with it, the plate is marked. Then it comes to us at the shears, and we trim it off square. And I guess that's about all.
And a pretty big awl at that.
Yes, sir?
We're all pulling on the same end of the rope in this business. And don't forget this. A ship's only as good as the builders can make her.
As good as the builders can make her, fellas. That's what he said.
What builders?
You, me, all of us. We're the builders, and don't let's forget it.